Hi everybody, foXnoMad here, and today I want to help you travel smarter by sharing a recent episode of the foXnoMad podcast with you. But before we get started, if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And now let me tell you about this episode with Sherry Ott. She is a blogger and adventurer, and her next journey is to travel from US capital to US capital by bicycle. We talk about why this journey was created, what made her take on this project, and how it's a continuation of something that her father began on foot many years ago. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Sherry Ott. And there we go. Yeah. So see, it's no
Okay.
different than before we hit record. It's pretty relaxed. Hi Sherry. Thanks. It's good to see you.
Hi.
I haven't talked to you in so long.
Years and years.
And you're one of the I mean, we were like kind of the first travel bloggers, I think. I mean, really in that first group that started.
I think so. I consider that. I mean, I'm sure, there were other people out there traveling around the world and maybe sort of talking about it, but we were on that cusp. We were on that beginning of what really became travel blogging. And I don't know about you, but that I look back at that and go, that was the really good times. I didn't know it at that point, but like, man, I loved it.
Yeah, I think it's because like people were doing it at that time because they really loved what they were doing. And I think
Yep.
now people just either want attention or money,
Yeah.
right? Like that's why they get
Yeah.
into getting online stuff, which we didn't, there was no real
No,
monetization. I mean, like at that time.
you're right. We just traveled around. I mean, I ended up after I had planned a year around the world, which I did. I had saved up to do that. But then after that year, I'm like, I want to stay on the road. And at that time, I decided to teach English as a second language because that was the only way I was even going to remotely make some money. And, yeah, it was so different then. And I was still blogging then, obviously, the whole time. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. It's really, really changed, but glad that we're both still in it in some way.
Yeah, I remember telling myself like when I started, like I'm just kind of one of those people that when I start something, I go, I'm gonna do this for like 10 years or whatever. Like I just set this crazy endurance goal. And so I was like, no matter what happens, I'm just gonna keep doing it. And yeah. And I
Well, you
enjoy
went
it
way
too.
beyond that.
Yeah. It's definitely been more than 10 years, yeah, for sure.
Yes. When did you start your website?
So
What year?
technically 2006, it was not
Oh,
the
same here.
same URL name, it was a different URL. And it was just my initials and my birth year, which was like what everybody's username was, like, in that time. And I started it as a way, it was like a couple of years out of college. It was like a way for a group of friends to like keep in touch. So we'd all, in theory, we all had
Yeah.
logins to the blog and we'd all like post updates. It was just me posting updates after like a couple weeks and like my mom commenting and stuff.
Yeah.
And then I got a comment from somebody who I didn't know. Like that was at one point, it was just like some random person. And I was like, oh,
Oh,
other
funny.
people are reading this. So like maybe I should do something with it and, give it a focus. And I love traveling. And then I was into, I was working in tech field at the time. So it just, that's how it started. Then I decided to change the name and stuff.
Yeah.
And
I it's funny that you say that because I also distinctly remember the first time I got a comment from someone that I didn't know. And I was just like, whoa, wait a minute. That other people are reading this? Like how did they find me? I had no concept of what like how the internet really worked. Even though I did come from an IT background, it was very different. I was managing application development and stuff like that for retailers. Um, and yeah, it was just that momentous occasion where you're just like, wait a minute, this is something else I didn't think it was, which is cool. I love the fact that you remember that too.
Yeah, it was. I don't remember the comment now, but I do remember
Oh,
that
I do.
that moment. Oh, okay. Anything
I
good
do
or
because
was
they
it?
Oh, it was good. They were asking me about my cat because I had written about my cat that I left basically to go travel. And they were asking me about how I came up with the name for my cat. So it's a very personal question too. And I'm just like, and she was from Brazil. And I was just like, what? This is crazy.
Yeah, it was a nice time. It was like a really nice time, I think, between, in those years up until like maybe like 2015, 16, things
Yeah.
changed a little bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then yeah, so now it's totally different. But I occasionally will go through or like accidentally in my browser, I'll like start typing like, like B or something, and then it will like how it auto fills.
Yeah.
And there will be like some random like travel blog I used to follow like, I don't know, like 8 years ago. And I'm like, whatever happened to that? I click through
Yeah.
and most of them don't exist. so, so most of them have
You're
kind
right.
of gone away.
You're right.
And what makes me sad is that people don't write like a final post, like why they stopped. And I'm like, what happened?
Oh, interesting. That's a
They just,
good point. Okay, I'll remember if I ever stop to write a final post.
yeah, they just kind of die out. And I'm like, oh, what happened? What happened? Uh, but you have not stopped. You are still blogging and running tours and
Yes.
doing crazy bike journeys,
Yes.
which I find fascinating. Um, so I guess that's the best place to start is what are you up to these days? Like just what are you working on and kind of where's the blog and what
Mhm.
state?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think you're absolutely right. Somewhere around 2015 or so, I was really losing steam for all kinds of reasons that we could do a whole show about, I'm sure. But I was nomadic for, much like you, I was nomadic for about 11 years total. And I decided to get a home base, and I'm here in Denver, Colorado, again, which was it was a really good decision for me because it had been a long time on the road without a home. Um, but at that time, I was still traveling quite a lot. So I was maybe here like, I don't know, let's say I was gone a good 80% of the time. So even though I had this home base, I didn't really know Denver that well because I was never here. I wasn't really making that many friends, etc. But I was, doing the whole new blogging thing, which was, go on press trips, uh, write about, stuff for Google, etc. Right. So you can get on social media, start working with brands and partnerships and all that stuff. So I did all that. But one of the things I really found is that I was unhappy, and I don't think I understood why. But for me, it was, now that I look at it, I had lost the really fun part of the journey. And this had really turned into a grind, this thing that I loved. And much like you, I mean, you've done some really incredible journeys. Like back in the beginning, when we were just kind of starting out blogging, that was one of the things I really loved, was finding super unique things to do, unique places to go. So back during that time, I did the Mongol rally, driving a car from London to Mongolia for 6 weeks. I did the rickshaw run, driving a auto rickshaw across to India for 2,000 miles. I walked the Camino de Santiago across Spain. So I was finding these like journeys that would really excite me, and it gave me something really interesting to write about and so on. But now it had evolved a lot into just press trips and writing for SEO and so on. And that spark was gone. And then the pandemic hit, and it I don't know, well, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I loved it in a weird way because it made me stay put. And all of a sudden I was forced to get to know my city that I was calling home. And one of the things that I did, also because we were in lockdown, and granted, we could go out and walk around, obviously, we didn't have that kind of restriction, but I started biking. I had a bike that I had bought off of Facebook Marketplace, and I didn't own a car at the time. So I was biking everywhere because it was kind of my substitution for travel because I could go out and explore. And I, got to know Denver that way. Denver has a ton of bike trails, which is, I didn't know, but you can go for hundreds of miles on bike trails here. So I started biking during the pandemic, and it really got me excited about something new again. So I wrote a little bit about that stuff, but what really happened then was I took something that was very old from my past and my family, and I kind of made it mine to make this new journey. So basically, it's really hard to explain, but basically, back when my father was 47 years old, I was 14 or something like that. It was 1984. I was 14. And he, for some unknown reason, he was an engineer for Caterpillar. Unknown reason, he decided he was going to start walking from capital to capital in the United States. And my dad was always kind of weird. He always had these big ideas, journey-ish stuff. Always had to be different, etc. So I kind of like, well, that's just dad. He's weird. But as a teenager, you don't want your parents to be weird because you want to like distance yourself as far as you
Yeah.
can from them. So I hated this new project of his. Hated it. I was embarrassed by it. And because I was also only 14, I would get drug along on it. So my mother would run logistics. So she would do the driving and like get hotels and pick him up and drop him off and bring him lunch, communicate by post-it notes on stop signs or signs. Because everything, I mean, this was obviously 1984, everything before what we have now to communicate. My dad had paper maps. He made this whole map of how to connect all the capitals. He was going in a counterclockwise direction around the United States. He had decided to do the lower 48 plus DC, so 49. He still worked full time. So over the years, I still hated it the whole time because I thought it was very weird. As I got older, I was like, this is interesting. But eventually my dad just stopped. It fizzled. And I think there's a lot of reasons. One, my mom got really tired of doing logistics. They had grandkids by that time. I mean, he did this over the course of probably 25 or 30 years. He finished 23 capital routes. He walked over like 5,000 miles finishing those. And then it just sat. And now back to present day, I've taken up biking, and throughout all my travels, and as I've gotten older, you start to realize all the ways that you are like your parents or the impact they probably had on you and so on. And his capital project was getting more intriguing to me because no one else has ever done it, which is very rare these days. And that was a huge draw to me. But when I like went back and looked at all of his notes, because I thought about it at one point, I'm like, well, I could finish walking this. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, there is a lot left, and I don't know that I want to walk it. So when I took up biking, it dawned on me, and I loved it so much that I could actually finish his project, but I could do it on bike my way. And that's when that whole big journey idea really started blossoming. And I had a big journey. I had a purpose again. I had something really interesting and different, and also, personally connected. And I really, really want to finish it. So that's kind of the big thing that I have going on now. Yeah. So much like my dad, though, he had a full-time job during this time when he was doing all this. So he would just do it on his vacations and weekends, and I'd get drug along and so on. And he would do, he would have a bunch of them started actually at once sometimes, but he kept very meticulous notes. We had a Commodore 64. He would type all of his notes into it and print them out. but same thing. So I'm still blogging. I'm still doing some press trips. I am cutting back a bit on it. Still going to very remote and unusual areas. But now what I'm doing also is peppering in these capital routes by bike. Uh, so the goal is to do about 4 or so a year. I basically have 26 left, or 26 to do that he hasn't. I think there's about 8 of them that he had kind of partway done. So finishing those off and then doing the new ones. And yeah, I'm doing like a few a year. And it is all completely new to me. I finished 3 of them so far. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, so wow. I love the story, but I love like it makes me think that, when you're a kid or a teenager, you think your parents are like statues or something. I don't know. You don't see them as like
Yes.
people that want to do stuff,
No.
kind of like they just
No.
exist to take care of you in a weird way. Like, and then when you get older, you're like, oh yeah, they were just people. Like I'm a person, right? Like, like nothing
Yep.
really. You don't. Yeah. So that's cool. I think that's a sweet story. Your mom doing logistics, and it's pretty yeah, I just love it because I think it helps you also understand yourself when you understand why your
Oh,
parents do stuff too.
yeah. And honestly, when I was growing up, I wanted to distance myself as far as I could from my dad because I didn't think I was anything like him. I thought I was my mother through and through. My mother's a very social person. My dad's more, he was an engineer. He's very logical.
Mhm.
Um, and he would come up with all these weird things and he always had to be different. We had a garden, like we were always the different family. And I hated that. And it was during travel, all those years of being nomadic and traveling, that I really started learning that, oh my God, I'm my dad. Like, how the hell did that happen? Like it was this big aha moment. And that big aha moment was really when I was walking the Camino de Santiago. Um, it dawned on me that I'm like, wait a minute, I'm walking across Spain. Like, and I'm doing all these weird and different things because I have this desire to be different and not like everyone else. And I want a big journey to tackle for my planning head and all that. And that's exactly what my dad was doing his whole life. He always had weird little projects. This was the biggest weird project. um, but yeah, I found it really interesting. The other thing that I find interesting is I know I'm older than you, but like my dad started it when he was 47 years old. When I asked my dad why he did it, he doesn't have any explanations. He says, well, I thought, why not? I like a big project, and I get that. But I also have a feeling it was also something around midlife, a way to slow down. I'm sure there were stresses of work that he was dealing with, all that kind of stuff. And so that's really where I'm at too. I'm in midlife. Um, and there is something so beautiful, and I'm sure you know this, about just trying to get from point A to point B and being on a big quest or journey, and how it simplifies everything in life down. It slows it all down to just, eating, sleeping, biking, walking, whatever it is. And you're just trying to get to the next point, and it gives you all this time to really think and process things. And that, I love that aspect. And I'm sure my dad did too. He just never really, I think, tapped into it or never wrote about it, that's for sure. So
Wow,
yeah,
yeah. No,
it's a great journey.
it's amazing what the human body can do. It's like if you really wanted to, I think, I mean, you could probably walk around the whole planet if you had, if the
Oh yeah,
weather and time, like, and that's kind of, I mean, that's
there are
basically what we
people that
did.
have done that.
Right.
Yes, yes.
And so it's pretty amazing. Um, but like, what was the first trip? What was the first capital to capital that you did?
That I did.
Hmm.
So when I decided I was going to do this, I also decided I need to better understand why my dad did this, and go and kind of really, like, my parents are both still alive. They're just about 87 years old. And all of a sudden, I also had this feeling of like, I need to get this stuff documented, because it's going to be gone, you know? So one of the trips that he had partially finished was the Minneapolis to Pierre, South Dakota. He had about 200 miles or so left to finish it. And it just so happens that my parents live in South Dakota, which is kind of ironic that he never finished that one. But so basically, I took on that as my first one. And I also used that opportunity because I wanted to get this all documented, to go up there. I brought a friend in, my friend Michaela, might remember her. She's a videographer. So I brought her in to help me get video interviews and document all this stuff with my parents at their home, at their farm in South Dakota. So we did that for a number of days. And then Michaela was my first, as we call it, logistics queen. And we went to where my dad last stopped, which was back in like 2009, was the last time he had walked. And I got on my bike and I started pedaling towards Pierre, South Dakota. And I did that for, I don't know, 4 days. Ran into all kinds of things that were new to me, including some really bad weather. And then what happened is my parents actually came out. I stopped a mile short of the Capitol building in Pierre, and my parents came out and I put my bike up and three of us walked into that Capitol together to kind of, for me, that was the handoff. Like my dad finished that Capitol and it was a really nice handoff then to me. And it was so special to be able to walk into this Capitol with them. And it brought back so many memories for me, even. And then the next day I got up and I started the next one, which was Pierre to Bismarck, North Dakota, so South Dakota to North Dakota. And I started that one on my own. So it was a really great little handoff. So those were two that I did last summer, South Dakota and North Dakota.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a sweet story. I really like that story. Um,
Yeah.
so when it comes to it's summer, so I guess in the Dakotas it's probably very hot. I'm guessing, summer, depending on when in the summer, there's maybe not a lot of rain in the summer, I'm guessing, or these kind of thunderstorms roll through.
Thunderstorms. Yeah, we had
Thunderstorms.
some massive storms and lot in the Great Plains. So South Dakota, North Dakota, so flat. The wind is just massive. And that was a big hurdle on these two trips, was the wind for sure.
So these are pretty long bike rides. I guess you can't really train to, ride 200 whatever miles. Do you do
Yeah, you're
anything
right.
special to prepare, or do you just say, all right, let's see what happens?
A little bit of both, because you also have to remember, like, I am completely new to biking. I really hadn't been a biker ever. I had never really, besides, little things here and there, but new to the idea of cycling, I guess we'll call it. And I I basically trained sort of here in Denver by doing like 40 or 50-mile rides, and I'd try to do like three back to back or something like that. But that was really the most I had done. I don't think I had ever gone over 50 miles at that point, and never more than 3 days in a row. Whereas these trips would require me to go multiple days in a row. But I did try to stick to like the 50 miles, 50 to 6, let's say 45 to 60 miles a day, depending. Because some days, like, I'd have to stop early or I couldn't do it because the wind, like, we had gusts of 40 miles an hour. I couldn't even keep the bike upright. And so then I'd have to adjust and go longer the next day. So, you plan and then, you see what happens and then replan every day. But so I'd kind of trained in that sense, but no, I talk about a lot now, like on the bike training, you just go and you hope everything works out. And if not, you replan. Um, But yeah, it was all really, really new to me. I'd never ridden on like the thing about Denver, training in Denver, it's all bike paths. So I had never ridden on roads with a bunch of traffic, and certainly roads with no shoulders. So that was, and still is, one of my big terrifying things for me. I'm just not comfortable with it yet. But yeah,
And
yeah.
you know, like how I guess in my head I can sort of conceptualize how long it takes to walk 50 miles, how long it takes to run it, maybe. But on a bike, like how is that like a 2 hours,
50,
4 hours,
50 miles for me is going to be it's going to be probably 4 hours.
4 hours?
If
Okay.
it's particularly, bad weather or
Hmm.
something, or a lot of uphill, it's going to be more like 5 hours. Um, so yeah, it depends. And my dad, when he didn't also do any training. He just decided to get up and walk one day. But he would walk somewhere between 20 to 30 miles a day, every day for multiple days. So he had he was doing a lot. Um, yeah. So, but this is faster. And I hope as I get more in shape cycling and so on and do more of these as I get more used to it, that I'll be able to up that to more like 70 miles a day or something like that. But the one thing, I'm still a travel writer and I still love to travel, and this is just a form of travel for me. So I don't want it to turn into this like just cycling. I am having so much fun going through small towns and exploring them. And then every time I get to a capital, I tour the Capitol building. Capitol buildings are fascinating, by the way. Everyone is so different. They always have such interesting history and architecture and so on. So, I'm documenting all of that. I'm talking about, what to do in that capital city, because lots of times the capital cities are kind of the unknown cities in a state, which is fun. I'm trying to meet up with bikers in that city also to kind of learn about the biking stuff there. So this is all turned into, a way that I document the trip and also give people ideas of what they can do in these capital cities. So I like to take time for that too, which is really important to me.
And so I guess you mentioned the roads, right? That's the first challenge. Because I mean, do you just take off? I guess you use the highways, right? I mean, there's no other way to go, I'm assuming, between
Yeah, you're right.
and just on the shoulder, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the problem is, um, when I sit here behind my desk and try to plan a route. So I also just finished this summer. I've started to do like 3 or 4 more, and I just finished Phoenix to Santa Fe, and, and I am not at all familiar with this part of the country. I know it sort of, but it's high desert. It's actually higher altitude than what you think. Most of my whole ride was well, once I got up to like 7,000 feet, it stuck around 6,000, 7,000 feet the whole time, but it's very dry and there are not many roads that go through that area. Whereas the Midwest, you've got farm roads. So like mile roads, everything is split up into miles. And so if you had to get off maybe a highway for some reason, you could always ride gravel roads. And I do have a gravel bike that I ride so that it gives me that ability to get off if I need to and ride on rougher trails, etc. Um, so that helps. But yeah, so when I'm sitting here looking at Google Maps and this Komoot app that I use that helps me build the bike routes. And it is a tedious process to try to figure out what roads you can take, what are really roads. I use Google Street View and I try to like figure it out. Like, does it look like there's a shoulder? Is there not a shoulder? Like, what is it? So that piece is really tedious. And you plan all this out for like 11 days to get from Phoenix to Santa Fe. And then you get there and everything can change. Um, and then each day you just replan again. But yeah, most of the time I'm on shoulders, hopefully. Lots of times on this last trip, I did not have any shoulder. And because there's not a lot of roads there or interstates even, were huge like semis and stuff going by me and RVs and all this stuff. Once I kind of got past the turnoff to where they normally go to the interstate, then it slowed down a little bit. But then I biked all the way through Albuquerque. There was a section on this last one that I actually had to bike 20 miles on the interstate, which I never in my wildest dreams thought I would have to do, but there was no way around it. And apparently, I've looked at this, it's legal to bike on the interstate if there's no alternatives. And this is a part of the old highway, Route 66, that I was biking on. And there are parts of that that are just not available anymore. There's no frontage roads, and you have to bike on the highway. Or on the interstate. ThereThere's no getting around it. So that was really crazy, traffic coming by you at 90 miles an hour. And the shoulder, even though it was a big shoulder, it wasn't in good shape, and there was so much debris and shredded tires, and any of that stuff can just knock you off in a second. So it was a lot of concentration.
Wow. Well,
And it was scary, I will say that.
and well, yeah, because it's two things that I think of. It's like, well, if you're on the shoulder and you fall, you don't have good, I mean, you don't want to fall into the traffic, on that side,
Yeah,
obviously. And then
yeah,
the other side, who knows, there might be a ditch or a guardrail or something, or,
yeah, yeah.
and
And there were places in this last one too where there was still snow piled up so high that I didn't have a shoulder, so I had nowhere to go. Like there was
mm.
nothing but snow to fall into, but that still would have been better than traffic. So
And how do the cars in general, how are
oh,
cars and trucks toward bikers?
mm. I thought about this a lot on this last trip because it was so many busy roads. Um, I'm gonna say more than half, the majority, let's say, are pretty good about getting over. Um, but not everyone, and some people are annoyed that you're there taking up space on the road and will show their annoyance also by either getting super close or I learned a term called coal rolling, which I didn't know, which is like
Hmm.
where a big truck or something or car will like hit their exhaust and it'll be that black exhaust, like
Oh,
to just piss you off, basically. Um, anyway, so it varied, I would say. I would get really mad at certain points if people wouldn't get over, especially if they had room. Like,
mhm.
uh, but I also said after this last route that I finished, I'm like, oh my God, I could just do like talks on public safety of how to drive when you know, encounter a biker, because yeah, you become pretty passionate about that as a biker, to give you room.
Yeah, you do notice that people don't seem to know how to react to bikes. At least when I
They
see
don't.
bikes in the US, especially, that they don't like. Sometimes people will give a lot of space, way too much space. I feel like, in other words, that they're kind of swinging without looking into the next lane, which can throw off traffic
Hmm.
dynamics, or they're way too close. And I always think, well, if the person hits a rock and falls, like, you don't want to be too close to the biker. You want to. It's like a motorcycle, but a lot slower. And I think people don't know the
Yeah,
rules, right? Like, if they think you should be on the
they don't.
sidewalk, right? If there was a
Oh yeah,
sidewalk.
like I said, lots of people get really, really mad that you would have the audacity to bike on, say, a mountain pass road with no shoulder where there's lots of turns. And you, as a biker, have the right to be there. You can be in the middle of the lane actually as a biker, but
Mhm.
you have the right to that lane. But um, yeah, most people don't know, and most people actually get angry about it.
Hmm.
But I will say the semi truck drivers were pretty good. Like the truck drivers were pretty good. And I think that's because they get trained, like
Hmm.
they have driving training and all that, right? The worst people were the RVers, especially RVers that were like pulling cars and stuff. I don't, and I think that's because there's a lot of people out there renting RVs that don't know anything about RVs. or what they're supposed to be doing, right? And there's no driving requirements besides a license that you need to do them. But yeah, like the RVs were the worst, I thought. And I would get so mad at anyone who was who was a car or a truck or an RV that had bikes on the back on a bike rack and they
Mm.
wouldn't get over. And I'm just like, they should take your bikes away. I would, what else are you going to do? I don't listen to
Yeah.
music or anything. So sometimes you get mad at the drivers.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, it is really weird to me. You're in a vehicle that can go 100 miles an hour, but you get upset when you have to slow down for like 5 seconds. It's just like it's
Yeah.
really funny. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Oh, it's
but
crazy.
and I mean, do you have any like close calls? Is anything that you worry
Not,
about?
oh, I worry about a lot of stuff, but I haven't had any close calls yet. The other thing is it's one thing being out in the middle of nowhere on
Mm,
these like little roads, but getting all of a sudden, like I had to bike all the way across Albuquerque, which was a full day.
mhm,
Um, and like all of a sudden, you've got to watch traffic, you've got to watch right turners. Now you're in commuting traffic, which is a whole
mhm,
different like set of stuff to think about and concentrate on. So that's hard. Um, and I've been lucky, you have to pay really close attention. And also I should say in cities, wherever there's a bike route, I try to stick to the
mhm,
bike routes for sure. Like I'll go and talk to the local bicycle shop or whatever, or the tourism department and talk about what I'm doing and try to get resources for getting across a big city. Um, but yeah, I worry about a lot of stuff. I mean, honestly, one of the things that I have kind of accepted in this whole thing is I think it'll be unusual if I get through this whole project and don't end up in some kind of accident. Um, it's just I've got 9,000 miles of riding basically. And as you noted, people here in the United States aren't really great with bikers. And so I hope that I make it through without any accidents. But I realistically, I've kind of said to myself, like, yep, that may happen. And I've also said to myself, it could be fatal. And I've had to decide that that's okay. Like, I'd rather be out doing something that I really love than sitting here not doing something. Like, this is important to me. So, I've thought about all of that. Other things that are really hard is the training aspect and trying to figure out the weather and all of that. And then the other thing is weirdly is logistics. So my my dad had my mother, which is great. They've been married for like 60 some years. Um, and she would do anything. Like she was wonderful. But I don't have anyone. So that is a big hurdle for me and things that I worry about. So I can plan out a route, but I really don't want to do this bike packing. I could, I suppose, but that's not necessarily, I may do some routes like that, but that's not my goal. Part of the fun for me is to have someone along to do logistics because then it becomes this kind of really fun partner thing too, which I like a lot, I'm finding. And so I have to try to find people that are willing to give up a week or two to basically drive and be my support vehicle. Um, but it can be super fun too. So like one of the things that I supply or whatever, or I offer as my logistics queen, could be a guy too, it doesn't matter, but you're always going to be called the logistics queen. Kind of an homage to my mother, is, if you come along and do that for me, I get the hotels and the food, I pay for, all of that. And you're just driving my car, um, dropping me off, picking me up, maybe going X amount of miles ahead if we have a worry about something. My last logistics queen helped me fight off dogs, which was great, which is another huge concern of mine. Random dogs that run out and scare the crap out of you. Um, or they call them reservation dogs, which there were plenty on this last trip. Uh, so for them, it's also a really fun time. And I love, eating and drinking in all these places. And so it becomes this kind of fun way to travel across the US with me, hopefully. But I have to find people that have the time to do that and that want to do that with me. So that's a big hurdle to this whole thing too.
And I feel like I probably people listening have a lot of questions about the logistics, and when I talk to people who do adventures, I like to get those things out of the way first, because really it can seem sort of like from the outside that's where people get stuck at, but there must be these amazing either views you get, or I mean, now we can talk about what are some of the things that you've experienced that maybe people would not expect, on a bike ride between, two different cities, or how does it affect you?
Mm. Ooh, that's a good question. Um, well, much like walking or running, it is a slow pace. It's a slow, digestible way to see the United States, which I love. And you too. We've been traveling all over the world for 17 years. It is kind of fun for me to come back into my own country and see it at this pace. Um, so I think I mean, the scenery of this last one was absolutely beautiful. Despite the roads kind of being crappy and no shoulder, the scenery was gorgeous. These big, long roads, that go out, and it's a really great time to reflect, and you feel small, and it's a really cool thing to be a part of. On this last one, I would say one of the things that surprised me that I hadn't really thought about, honestly, probably because I was so worried about everything else with biking, was like, we learned a lot about the small towns that we were going through, and many of them were pueblos, so reservation type towns. I can't remember, there's like 19 pueblos in New Mexico alone. So, and we stayed in some of the pueblos. So, it was a chance to really kind of learn more about that. We talked to people there. We met, it was fascinating. Um, so there's some of that stuff too that, like, I don't know, it's really special to me. And that's kind of from a travel perspective. Um, the food, it is just, it is a great trip. It's a great, way to see culture, new food, new drinks, all that kind of stuff, new landscapes. Um, so far, that's been really, really enjoyable to me. Like, when this last one ended, when I finished in Santa Fe, it was really nice to have a day off because I had done a lot of days in a row. But there was a part of me that was actually sad that I was putting my bike on the bike rack and driving back to Denver. Like, I wanted to keep going. I was in this, you get in this groove, and it's this beautiful groove where, like I said, all you're doing is worrying about biking, eating, and sleeping. And it's a lot of fun. So, and I forgot how much fun that was. Like, I loved it in the Camino de Santiago. I actually really loved it in doing the Mongol rally and stuff like that. This like little routine that you get in your vehicle, or your, way that you're moving from point A to point B. And it's just, there's something really therapeutic and comforting about it.
Yeah, no, I often think about that when I'm doing like a walk or a long train ride, or something like that, where
Mm-hmm.
I'm disconnected for long periods. And I think people from most of human history have lived their lives like this. So I
Mm-hmm.
just think, like, how time slows down for you when you do that kind of thing, that
Yep.
they're I just, maybe I'm glorifying, but I think like their lives must have felt so much longer. Like I feel maybe or it was just like the same thing every day and they didn't have, but I just feel like, because yeah, and then because when you return to the real world, it's like fast, 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 and the
Yeah.
days go by like
It
so
was
quickly.
sad. Yeah. Yeah. And I also even felt, and I remember this feeling also when I did Camino de Santiago, because that was 5 solid weeks of just walking, right? And I never took a taxi, never did anything. I just walked. And so I remember finally being in taking a taxi to the airport at the end when I was leaving. And it was the first time I had been in a car going at that faster speed for over a month. And it was a really weird feeling. And I'll say the same about this too. I was so used to going my, say, 12 to 15 miles an hour on my bike that when I would get in my car and drive, there was something that felt just weird about it. Um, I don't know. It was very strange, but yeah, you get used to a certain pace, seeing things go by at a certain pace, and I think that's really kind of cool. Um, yeah, I'm sure, I'm positive that's some of the things that my dad loved about it too, about his walking journey. I'm sure it was, um, because I don't think he would have done that many or continued it otherwise. But I think there was something super comforting there for him about it.
And
The
have you?
other, I will,
Oh,
oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, no, no,
Oh,
no,
I was
no.
just going to say the other thing I just thought about was it's like I said, my dad took notes. He had this little tiny recorder, tape recorder, mini one, and he would speak into it, and then he'd come home and transcribe it, and then we'd type it into the Commodore 64. So I have all those notes. They're not, but they're just notes. They're like, I crossed this river at this time, like there's not a lot of other stuff in it, but there are some gems. And what I found is that lots of times the stuff that he would note that wasn't just the logistical stuff were things that he would see that would bring back memories from his childhood or how he grew up, or and he'd reference that just a little bit, and I could tell that he got there was a lot of comfort from that, like this whole remembering and processing your childhood and how you grew up or whatever. And the weird thing was, from the first day I got on the bike when I was starting off to go to Pure, that's what came flooding back to me, were all these weird childhood memories of like learning how to ride a bike, stuff we did on family vacations. Like that was consuming my mind those first few days I was biking. So I do think there's a piece of that too, where you process your childhood or your memories or something too, which is weird.
And have you had a chance to talk to him and kind of uh, compare notes, if it were, or memories or
Hmm.
experiences?
A little bit. I like that idea of comparing notes, and that's a really good idea. And I should actually sit down and do that with a purpose. Um, we certainly talk about it. We actually have this kind of ongoing argument of um, what's harder. Is it harder to walk from capital to capital or harder to bike from capital to capital? So you can tell that we're a very competitive family. Um, uh, so we do talk about that a little bit. He had the freedom of walking where he could, cut across on train tracks or cut across a field or wade through a river or something. And he would do that a lot because he was very much about shortest distance from point A to point B. And I don't have that luxury on a bike. I'm very restricted to roads of some sort typically. But so we've talked a little bit about that. I'm trying to think. And we talk a lot about the capitals themselves because there's always, interesting stuff about them. Um, but yeah, I mean, I like that idea though. I will go back and get some very specific questions about similarities and so on. He used to also have a lot more people because he was walking. He would have people stop all the time and ask to give him a ride all
Mm.
the time. So he would weirdly have a lot more interaction with people, whereas me on a bike, I have very little interaction with people until I get into a town or something
Mm.
like that. Um, Very rarely have people stopped and asked if I needed anything or,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
because they're used to seeing bikers out, but yeah, yeah.
And have you had like a moment on the road during these trips where you just kind of went, I can't believe this is my life, or wow, I can't believe I'm seeing this or experiencing this? Any moment like that?
Yeah. definitely. Like I can't, they've definitely had moments where I'm like, I can't believe that I'm doing this. And even like when I finished Santa Fe this time, the interesting thing, and I kept on thinking about this, um, because I love the fact that like you can never predict life, right? Like, we can try to control it as much as we as we can or want, but things happen that you don't expect. And I love that about life. And that's one of the things I loved about travel and living nomadically and doing everything up to this point. So one of the things that I kept on thinking about with Santa Fe was I had never been to Santa Fe before, really. Um, I had planned a trip with one of my girlfriends down to Santa Fe, a road trip, to do some coverage, like press trippy thing. And that was supposed to be March of 2020. And so that obviously got canceled. Everything got closed down. And I was thinking about the fact that like that was before I ever biked or did anything. And I'm like, wow, in my wildest dreams back then when I had to cancel that trip, never in my wildest dreams would I think that I was going to end up in Santa Fe 3 years later as a part of my dad's quest biking from Phoenix. Like that's crazy. um, so I love that kind of stuff. Like big turns that your life takes, that's unpredictable.
Yeah, it
So
sounds like
so
you
yeah.
you met the goal that you set out for when you originally came up with this idea, um, which is amazing. And it's still like there's still
Yeah.
more to go. You still have what you've done four. You've got
Oh, so much more. I finished three. This summer I'm going to finish off Iowa because my dad only has a little bit left of that. And then I'm also finishing Montana. So those are two that I'm doing yet this summer. And then I'm thinking maybe late fall, early winter to tackle Kansas to Oklahoma. So Topeka to Oklahoma City. Um, but yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, I grew up in the Midwest. And so what my dad got a lot of the Midwest done, and he did a lot of the East Coast. Um, Yet I do have some significant part of the Northeast left. But what he didn't do was the West. And so which is kind of nice for me because I'm in Denver in the West and it's easy to get to some of this stuff. But it's all the big, wide open space and mountain passes. It's all the big mountain passes and deserts, like I'll have to figure out how to get around Death Valley, et cetera. Um, so that's why even though I only have like 23 left now, I still have about 8,000 miles or so because it's the big distances. I have
wow.
to go from Carson City, Nevada down to Phoenix at some point, which
Oh
is
wow, that's far.
800 or so. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And through some really challenging terrain. So we'll see.
Yeah,
But
that'll be an interesting a ride for sure. I mean, I've driven through Nevada and it's just like there's nothing. I mean, there's just like
yeah.
for a long like no nothing. I mean, uh,
And who knows? Maybe I'll cut over into California. I think there's some routes there. That's one thing. Um, Another thing from route planning, I am using since I'm new, I learned about all these organizations. There's an organization called the Adventure Cycling Association. They're actually a nonprofit, but one of the things they do is they really support bike travel. And so they have routes and routes of like long distance routes, either across the country or up or down or whatever. So they have a lot of maps and stuff and routes that you can use. And I try to, utilize them whenever I can. Plus they're just a great resource for bike travel. So that's really great. But yeah, so I have a lot left. And one of the things I was going to say also, because I know you're in DC, so I told you he's doing the lower 48 plus DC. So my goal is to have the last one be DC, and finish at the White House. And my dream, I'll just state this, because I don't know when that'll be. It might be 5 years, it might be 10 years from now. My dream is to be able to finish in DC, meet the president, and have it be a woman. So those are my three things. If I could do any of those things, that would be great. But yeah, I think it'll be a fun place to end.
That sounds like three great goals. I think you'll need. I think yeah. The first one you'll get to DC. The second one, meet the president. You could, the third one you're gonna need some
Never
help,
know.
but hopefully,
Yeah,
hopefully you get, you need the candidate and
I
then you need the
know.
votes. But
I know.
uh,
I know. It's gonna
unless
be
you're
hard.
thinking of going
But
into politics, and then
no. No.
like I'm just gonna be the president, then that'll solve.
No. Well, that would be a new journey. No. Yeah, I wouldn't be happy with any of them though. Like, I really do think it would be cool. I have, I'm also taking my travel writing background, and working with tourism boards and stuff like that as I come into these capital cities and or travel through cities, which is fun. And some of them that I've talked to even have been really excited. Some states, tourism boards have been really excited about it. And some have even been like, oh, our governor is a big biker and maybe they can bike with you. I'm like, yeah, sure, bring the governor on. So who knows? My goal is also what I'm doing. As I said, I'm documenting a bunch of this, and it's actually going to start really soon. I'm just about done with the first episode, but I'm going to do each route as an episode on YouTube. So I'm doing video stuff all along the way when I'm on the bike and so on. And so the first episode out will be shortly on my YouTube channel, and it's going to be kind of the basics of what is this. It's those initial
Mm.
interviews with my parents that we went up to go do, and then the second episode will be the trip to Piers where I walked in with my parents, etc. Um, so there'll be a way to document it in that way, which I think will be really fun.
I'll make sure to link to it, so that people can follow along, and let me know, where should people find you? Where can they find you? What's your YouTube handle?
My YouTube handle is at Otsworld. Same thing as my website, otsworld.com. And when I'm on the route, I mean, so the YouTube episodes are way more extensive, like, anywhere around 10 minutes or so, but um, they'll be they'll be showing up after I finish that route. But while I'm on a route, I do Instagram and Facebook stories each day, of what goes on, or what dogs come out and chase me, or what margarita I had, or whatever, right? So there are lots of ways to follow. You can follow live. You could watch the YouTube channel after. And then if you have any interest I'll also give you the link to the map, which is my dad's route of what capitals I'm going to and what's left. And if
Mhm.
you ever have any interest in biking with me for part of it or being logistics, you
Yeah,
could always contact me.
yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah, yeah. So always looking for people to join. I mean, one of my goals here is to also bring a lot of visibility to bike travel, and you know, and seeing how to see the U.S. at a slower pace.
Wow. Well, I think it's fantastic. I'm just trying to imagine the things that you see, and that you experience through kind of road trips that I've done. But I know being in a car is
Mhm.
is a different experience. You can kind of turn your brain off in a car, like for a long distance. When you're just
Yeah,
driving, you just kind of like,
yeah.
but to
This
be
is
able
all,
to
yeah. And there
stop,
are
it's
times, yeah. But I talk to cows. I talk to a lot of cows that I go by. They don't talk back, sadly. But yeah, there is a lot to see, and your brain doesn't really turn off that much. It's great though.
well, I will, let's coordinate for logistics, or bike ride. I think that would be super fun. Um,
Yeah,
and so yeah, that would be great. And if you see any UFOs in Nevada, if you like go down by Area 51, I've driven down
yeah.
there and I looked, I didn't see anything, but I heard a lot of like coyotes, and I heard things yowling, and I was like, I'm gonna get
Mhm.
back in the car. I was like, "Meh." So, but if you see anything,
Yes, I'll make sure to document it.
people apparently
Um,
there's like a small town where people camp right outside of Area 51. Uh, but
oh,
and they
really?
see stuff, but I mean it's next to a military, like air base, so they're definitely seeing things.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're from another, planet, but that'll be
Oh
cool.
my God, that's awesome. See, that'll be fun.
So, yeah, coyotes and
Lots of cool states left for sure.
well, I will link to everywhere that everybody can find you and follow the journey where you're going. So thank you so much for sharing your story today. I like I said, I think it's just really cool. It's very unique. It's challenging.
Thanks.
It's something that, yeah, it's not something that a lot of people would undertake. It just seems very difficult, but um, I think with the planning and the logistics, I think you've put in some things that I wouldn't have thought about. That's a good idea.
Yeah, and it's, like any big journey or challenge that you take on, it seems really, really big and daunting. And then you get on it and it just kind of happens. And that fear, that stuff kind of melts away a little bit and it becomes more doable day by day. So yeah, it's been a really great experience. And I would encourage anyone else to go out and try their own big journey or quest or whatever that may be. Because it is a really rewarding process.
Well, thank you again. Everybody listening, make sure you check out the links in the description and talk to you in the next episode. Thanks very much for watching this episode. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons down below so you don't miss any upcoming videos, and I'll see you in the next one.